Welcome to Lesson 5, Working with the Drawing Tools. In this lesson, I'm going to review how to use the pen tool, which is critical to know and understand and feel comfortable with when you're working in Illustrator. It's not all that difficult once you figure out how to use the tool. So to start, I'm selecting File, Browse and Bridge, and going out to my lesson files and opening up AI05 and opening up AI0501. And in here, I have an exercise file that I can do. Now it's zoomed in, which is fine. If you need help and want to position this a little better, you can hold down your space bar and then just push around this image. I want you to select your pen tool. And first of all, we'll do something really easy. Click and click and click and click and click. Now you'll notice that my shape is filling in with white because my fill is set for white. Over here, if you see this, you can either change this here or you can change it in the appearance panel, but I want you to select the fill, make sure it's forward, and click on none. Make sure your stroke is set to black, which mine is. If yours isn't, you can pull the stroke forward by clicking on it and then selecting black from your color. So that was relatively simple, creating that path. If you take the solid selection tool and you click and drag that, you'll see the entire path moves. That's how you reposition a path that you made. If you click off to deactivate that and then go back to the direct selection tool, you'll notice that you can click and drag on an individual anchor point and change that path. If I click on a point, it moves both of those paths. If I click on a line segment, it just moves that one segment. So that's how you edit a path after you've created it. Now this is a live path and it's active, which means if I go back to my pen tool, I risk connecting this to the next shape. I did switch to the pen tool, but what I'm going to do is hold down my Control or Command key, and you'll see that I temporarily get the last selection tool I had activated, and I can just click off to deactivate that path. Now I'm ready to go ahead and create the next path. So I click in one, shift click, shift click, shift click, shift click, and shift click. By holding down the shift key and clicking, you constrain your path to be on a 45, 90 degree, 180 degree angle so that you can create the straight lines that you need. So those paths, again, are relatively easy. Now I'm holding down my space bar and I'm pushing up to go to the next path. This is a little more difficult. That's because it requires you to click and drag to create your Bezier curves. Now, if I were to just take a blank area here, and first of all, you'll notice this is still active. So what do I have to do? I have to hold down my Control or Command key and click off. Now, if I just click and then click and drag, I create a curve. That first curve is kind of a wimpy curve though, and I need a really strong curve here. So look what I do. First of all, I press delete a couple times to get rid of that path. I go back to one, but instead of just clicking and then clicking and dragging, which gives me next to nothing, I click and drag up about the same height as that arch is and in the same direction of the arch. I can then go to the other side and click and drag down, and you'll see that now I have a really strong arch. I'll go to number 3 and click and drag up, and 4 and click and drag down. Don't worry if your path doesn't follow exactly this path, because you can go back to your direct selection tool and reactivate those points and then edit those paths until they do fit. You can move the whole anchor point or just the directional lines that are associated with that. Now these directional lines don't print, nobody sees them but you when you activate the path, and they're simply used for you to be able to control that angle. Now I'm going to scroll down because this next exercise is a little more difficult. I do have the selection tool active right now, so I can just click without holding down the Control or Command key, but I'm going to go to the pen tool, click and drag up, click and drag down, just like we did in the previous exercise. But what happens when I want to create this next arch? You'll notice that if I click and drag over here, I get some weird results. So I'm going to go ahead and Control Z that I'm going to Control Z several times, or if you're on the Mac, Command C, just to go back to the start. I'm clicking and dragging to make my first arch and clicking and dragging down. Now before I even release, so get this, you're not letting go of your mouse. Before you release, you hold down the Alt or the Option key and you're swinging this guy back up. That's turning that curve point into a corner anchor point. And so you can see I can swing this back up. I'm creating the directional line for the next arch. I then let go of everything. I let go of the Alt and Option key, I let go of the mouse, and then I come over here and without holding any modifier keys, I click and drag down. Now before I release, I hold down the Option or Alt, swing that back up, release all keys, and then click and drag down. That's one that you want to practice with. And that's one of the more difficult curves to create. But once you have this down, you'll see it's all over the place. And as you're creating these paths, it could be in a portrait of a person or fur or a pattern or whatever, but you're going to see this pattern repeated a lot of times and you're really going to want to practice understanding how to change those smooth curve points into corner points. Now another method is this. Now I'm going to go ahead and hold down my Control or Command key to give me my selection tool temporarily and click off. I'm going down to make my arch. Click and drag up, click and drag down. Now in Illustrator, all I have to do is click on this last anchor point to turn that curved point into a corner point. But I have to make sure I see that caret. And if you notice there's an upside down V, that's what I'm referring to as a caret. You have to make sure that that appears because that's indicating that you are directly on top of that anchor point. And when I click, I now lost that second directional line. And then I can shift click to go straight. We'll try it this way too. First of all, I Control click to deactivate that path. I click, shift click without holding anything down, but just looking for that caret. I click and drag up to create my next arch and then click and drag down. Excellent. So in this lesson, you discovered how to take advantage of using the pen tool.